I don't know. I guess it's fair. I've been involved in open source now since early 2000, 2001, so 19, nearly 20 years, and I'm really passionate about it. It's the end of a long day, so I don't look that passionate, and I'm between you and the cocktails as well, which is another challenge. But I am genuinely passionate about it, and it's interesting. We've had number of our VCs, investors, other companies say to us, why don't you switch out of open source? Why are you still open source? And there was definitely a while. Oh, my slide's going to come up at some point? I hope so. Thank you. Someone decided they should be closed and out and completely non-transparent. So, and we believe that the open source is more than just a license model. It's more than just a code. It's absolutely central to the way we operate and to our value proposition to you. So I'm not going to take long, but that's really the thesis of this talk, and I'll be quite quick. So we've talked multiple times about disaggregation throughout the day, and of course, what disaggregation is really talking about is having different organizations, whether it's different divisions in your team, or whether it's different businesses, or whether it's different parts of government, or whether it's consumers, whether it's app developers, and they typically are talking through APIs. We're talking about integration, and of course we've talked about identity. We've just heard about that. And this disaggregation requires all of these things to work well across boundaries. And how does that happen? This is exactly what we've just been hearing about all day. It happens through open standards. And that's how we formed WSO2. That's why we started the company. We felt that open standards were creating a different way of building systems that was all about open networking, about building applications that are distributed across the network. And fundamentally, me and Sanjeeva were at IBM, and we were involved in, for instance, adding the first SOAP support to WebSphere. And what that was a layer on top of J2EE and EJBs. And EJBs was a layer on top of Corba, and Corba was a layer on top of Java Beans. And this layering seemed to be like every time you added something, you made the thing more complex and more heavyweight. And we felt that open standards were an opportunity to say, we can cut out a lot of that legacy and build something smaller, lighter, cleaner that just worked. So open standards are absolutely vital to this. But it's not just open standards. We think that the transparency of openness creates a different environment for us to work. So how many of you have looked at the WSO2 source code? Anyone? Excellent. How many of you have looked at source code of other open source projects? Yes. How many of you actually loaded it into a debugger to help you figure out what's happening? There we go. Awesome. See, this is instantly changing the way you interact with a piece of software. You have a problem, and obviously we're very proud of our support, and I hear it over and over again, customers and partners telling us our support is great. But sometimes you don't want to phone up support. You just want to find what's happening here. You load up the source code into the debugger, you're away. Now, of course, with Java, you can decompile it, but that's kind of painful. You lose a lot of the actual semantic data. You don't get all the comments. So, and it's potentially illegal as well, yes, depending on your jurisdiction and the source code and the license and everything else. I mean, another example is performance testing. We used to publish performance tests, and all the licenses, all the click-through licenses for BEA, WebLogic, and WebSphere, and all the things we wanted to performance test against, say you cannot run performance tests on this. You cannot publish any performance data. So we would say, well, we are better than a leading ESB because we couldn't name them because it's illegal. So there's this transparency of the code, that's IP transparency, but there's also transparency of how we run things. And this is about letting people become committers. This is about how the code gets pulled in, and I'm going to talk about that. And then we're also very keen on operational transparency. So as Devika said, we're a private company, but we're publishing financial figures. We think we have fair business terms. We're very open about our business model. We're very open about what we think we're doing, and we think all of this is important. And this all helps build an ecosystem. So I'm sure many of you know this, but there's really two forms of open source license. There's what are called permissive licenses and copyleft licenses. So permissive licenses basically say you can do what you like, as long as you acknowledge this is open source. And sometimes they have one little thing in there which says, if you sue us for a patent violation, then we take away, then you can't use our patents. Do you know what I mean? You can't use our IP if you sue us for your IP. So some licenses have that one restriction, which is you can use it as much as you like as long as you play fair. The copyleft, the GPL or AGPL and various other ones are much more viral. The basic idea here is that if you write code that extends this open source or you change it, you also have to make your code open source. And this was where a lot of fear of open source came from initially, because a lot of people were like, oh my God, if I do anything with open source, I have to be open source. And that's not true. The copyleft is a very specific approach, and I have no problem with it. I think it's a good license for early projects. It's a good license for some things, but it's not what WSO2 has chosen. We've chosen the permissive approach. We're very free and open, and we've, we saw that this morning, didn't we? Devika asked, how many people are using WSO2 without a contract? And lots of you put your hands up, and Devika may want to come and hunt you down, but there's nothing he can do. You're free to use our stuff openly. That's part of our open model. And then I also want to make another distinction between open source and open core. So for example, ForgeRock and MuleSoft took the model that they were going to make the very core of the system open, but all the good bits, the clustering, the high availability, the tooling, maybe the documentation, those aspects are not open. And ForgeRock's done this with a license called CDDL, which is actually even worse because it's not really a permissive license. It's somewhere between a permissive and a copyleft license. It basically says you can't really use this for commercial stuff. And the problem with open core is I think it has a half-life. It actually starts out pretty well. You get a community project and you get people contributing to it, but over time those contributions drop off because the real use of it all moves to the proprietary license. And I think we really saw that with MuleSoft. I know MuleSoft quite well because they're a competitor of ours. It had a very vibrant community to start with, and that community's kind of died away. Open source, the business model that us and Red Hat and other more pure open source models use is basically to say you get a subscription. So the code is open, but we try and provide value with a subscription, and I'll explain what that value is. And why do I think open source is important? I think it changes the model in lots of ways. So firstly, it frees you up from vendor lock-in. It lets you load the source up into your debugger and make changes. It lets you contribute code back and say, well, actually, I found a problem. We publish our roadmaps openly, and so you can go on and see our roadmaps and say, actually, I really like that feature, but I'd also like this. It certainly, I think, speeds up velocity of innovation. We use a lot of other open source. That speeds us up. We compete with a lot of open source. That speeds us up. And it just gives us, so for example, a lot of our customers complain to me. They say, Paul, you've done too many releases, and I'm not keeping up with you. I'm having trouble upgrading all these releases, especially Identity Server, which has done like 7 releases in 18 months. So we tried to solve that with this WSO2 Update Manager, which helps automate the updates and automate your testing and deployment of those. And we do a lot of work on making sure there's backwards compatibility and migration scripts and so forth. But we don't want to slow down our velocity. We think that, but I think that the biggest thing I think is important is, come back to this problem. We said there's 1 billion endpoints out there. They're growing rapidly. There's 4 billion identities at least. There's 4 billion people using the internet somehow. Probably each of them has 3 or 4 identities, whether they have a Gmail account and a SIM identity and so forth. There's, I think, meant to be 25 billion IoT devices all have an identity, growing to 75. You cannot deal with this scale of problem just on your own. IBM, Oracle, I just don't believe that any one company can deal with the variety of things we need to integrate with, the set of systems we need to talk to. So we need open source. And you see that. You see IBM and Oracle and everyone using open source libraries in their code, but not necessarily giving back. Now, in some cases they do. Red Hat certainly do. But you need it to give back as well as to take in order for this ecosystem to build what we need to solve the integration problems of the next century. And I'm not saying WSO2 is going to do that. That's a big vision, but we're part of that. And we think that's an important give back and part of it. So we took our governance model from the Apache way. And the primary concept of the Apache way is you build a community and the community builds good code. It's very similar to that thing in the Agile Manifesto. The right teams build the right architecture and the right code. And we think it's very scalable. You make decisions by a consensus of committers, and anyone can become a committer. So anyone who contributes can become a committer, but when they do, you have to sign an agreement to say you're not going to start taking your company's code and just wholesale giving it to us. It has to be your code that you contribute. And we think that it goes beyond just open source, and so we are committed to opening up all our source code, so basically all our products. We're committed to also opening up our financial data, so being open about our revenue and our subscription rates, being open about our customers as much as they accept that. And of course, not everyone does. Not everyone wants to be a customer reference. But about 300 out of our 500 customers have been willing to be a case study and have been very kind in that way. And that brings a lot of it. And a lot of the value is here today. We've had 2 outstanding talks from customers telling what they've done, sharing what their experiences were. And I know that a lot of you have been talking in the hallways about why you're here. That's very valuable. And we also are trying to become much more open to work with partners. So for example, the identity server, you saw that connector store. We have around 40 or 50 different connectors in there to different systems. With Ballerina, we already have multiple connectors. We've been doing webinars with all sorts of other partners on how we work with them. And we think that being part of this ecosystem is really important, and open source creates that level playing field that makes it much easier. And finally, we actually encourage all of our team members to use open source as a bootstrap. We have had many, I think more than 100, probably 150 of our team go on and do PhDs in universities around the world. And many of them have done that based on the fact that they were contributors to Apache projects, committers to open source, that they had published papers openly in peer-reviewed journals. We've encouraged that as a way of saying, look, this is just part of your career. So a little bit about our business model. So, of course, we build a lot of our own components, but we also reuse a lot of great open source components. And we take all of those pieces and we build them into products. And those products, I guess the big benefit is that they are providing reusable value. So API management is something that works well in telecoms, in banking, in retail, in finance, in transport, in all sorts of industries, and we create something that's highly reusable, and that's our model, is we want to be reusable across multiple industries and find products that give you value. And so what that means is that when one of our customers says, Paul, I really need to add a new token type to the API manager, but for my use case, we look at that and we say, actually, that looks like it'd be useful to other customers, and we bring it in. Interestingly, we've often had customers pay us to improve the product. On several occasions, customers have paid us to develop a component that goes into the product. And you might say, why are they paying you to do a better product? The other way of looking at it is that they've paid us once to develop this, and now it's part of the product, and we're supporting it forevermore. So they've got a massive value out of that. And we've actually said to people, no, we're not even going to take your money to improve the product because we don't think that's something useful to anyone else. We think that's only useful to you. We'll build it for you, but you have to own the maintenance or pay us to maintain it, because it's not a generally useful product. It's just going to clutter up our thing with something that you want and no one else wants. So we're quite picky about that. So we have a bunch of things, as I said, that are available to anyone who wants to use it. So obviously you can download the products. There's no split between the community and the full edition. They're all enterprise grade. When you download the product, you're getting what eBay's using in production, what StubHub's using in production, what JLR's using in production, what FNB's using in production. And we do regular upgrades. So we do these updates usually every quarter, occasionally every 2 quarters, with all the patches and fixes that we've done over that past quarter. We have support on Stack Overflow for anyone who wants to use it. We have a support bot using machine learning on our database. And we do provide security updates on the latest version. So we provide free security updates. If there's a security problem, we ship an update to say, but we don't backport it to all the old versions. And we have a whole bunch of online training and documentation. But of course, we would like you to take a subscription out, and that's where you get these things that Devika talked about, like the 10-year long-term support, a private support account where you can do things, security bulletins. We give customers early access to security updates, because there's a sort of funny window where you want to make sure everyone gets access and can update the system before the problem's known about. And a range of consulting services. We give certain customers technical account managers based on how big you are and so forth. So there's a whole lot of value, and I'm not really here to sell you on that. You can go talk to Devika. But fundamentally, we think this is a fair business model, that everyone gets the open source, but we are giving enough value to our customers who pay us that it's a fair distribution between what you get for free and what you pay for. And that is a kind of another way of looking at it, that we're trying to give you access to our experts, reduce the risk, give you potentially some public and managed cloud capabilities on top of this so we can manage it for you, and really give you that assurance that we're going to be there for you and we're going to support this product for you for up to 10 years. And so that model is very simple. All our products are under Apache license. All our documentation is under the Creative Commons or Apache license, depending if it's text or code. And if you're a customer, then you get the updates and patches, and they are given under a commercial terms license. But as I say, those are everything we give to our customers. You can wait a quarter, and we'll roll it up into the product update. We don't hold back fixes from non-paying customers. So we think that our value is more than just the software. We think that our value is our expertise. I talked earlier about the reference methodology and reference architecture. We think we have a lot of value in our wider thinking about these problems. And again, we've done those under the Creative Commons license to encourage people to involve. We think we have economies of scale, that we can do a better job of building an API manager than other people can, and you can therefore get that for much less than the cost it would take you to build it. I teach a course at Oxford, and one of my students works for a large oil company. And one of the sessions was, it's about service-oriented architecture, and I did a session on identity and showed them the identity server, and he was like, all this is free? We're building all this. And I said, well, you're building all that. Why are you building it? Because we didn't think we could get it ourselves. So they literally built their own OIDC, their own adaptive authentication, all that stuff you just heard Vidura talk about, they built for themselves as a one-off. And it's just not a sustainable model. Even if you're a large oil company and you have massive profits, it's just not a sustainable model. And of course, we reuse a lot of open source too. So we get a lot of efficiency from that as well as being part of a community. So we think it's a fair exchange of value is our view. And I guess that's our mantra. We want to be something that customers want to work with. We want you to see us as a fair value. And we've kind of put a self-limiting thing there. If it's not fair and it's not good value, you're going to go with the open source and not pay us. Do you know what I mean? We're not locking you in. So if we're not giving you enough value, you're going to say, sorry, Paul, bye. So it's a self-limiting model. And we sort of heard earlier we're doing well with cash flow positive. We're growing at 50%. We're now the 6th largest open source vendor and the largest integration vendor. And so it's working. And I think Red Hat has also shown that this model can work. We're very pleased with it. And I think as Devika said, 14 years ago when we started, this was a gamble. And we've had a lot of people try and push us and say you should stop being so open, you can make more money. But we think this is the right model. And it's not just the right model for code, it's the right model to create a community and an ecosystem and to solve these problems of how do you integrate in the 21st century. So I hope maybe that's changed some of your views of open source or reinforced them. And thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Just a quick question. When you started 14 years ago and decided to go open source, what are the key instruments you had to put in place to make sure you build, momentum going forward? So there must have been a couple of key things that you had, perhaps structures or. So
that's really interesting. We inherited a lot of ideas from Apache. And one of the ideas we inherited from Apache is that the developers are also doing support, are also talking to customers, are also fixing bugs. So we instituted this thing we call a rotation model. And we have had to modify it multiple times as we've scaled. It's not, the initial rotation model was just like everyone's doing everything, and we had to put in place a lot more structures, and of course we do have some dedicated support people now who've usually come from one of the other things, and they may change into something else, but they have 1 or 2 years as a dedicated support person because our customers say, look, I need to speak to the same guy I spoke to yesterday. But that rotation model has created a much stronger technical team than I've ever had, when I was at IBM or other companies before, because they really understand the problems. And this is one of the things of open source is that you have a mailing list, you directly interact with your users, you begin to build up this rapport, and especially in middleware. If you're building mobile phone apps, you might be a user of those. But if you're a middleware developer, you're unlikely to need a message broker in your everyday life. You're not a user of that, right? So we try and dog food ourselves. We use our own integration technology to solve our finance department's integration challenges, right? So we do that as well. But really knowing your customer through open source is a great way of building that rapport and understanding your use cases better and building better systems. So that was a massive part of it.
Thank you. Maybe just to follow up on that very quickly. If you look at your code base currently, what percentage of that code base would you say emanates from the thinking from the community as opposed to the thinking from WSO2. So if you had to try and balance that out, what percentage is your thinking, to put it crudely, and what percentage comes from the wider community?
That's a hell of a question, I'm sorry. So, you know, I mean, if you look at, for instance, our API manager, that has a lot of our thinking. It inherited from our identity models, it inherited from a product we had called the governance registry. It inherited a whole lot of our thinking for 10 years of doing this sort of stuff. But at the same time, you know, where does Swagger come from? It comes from the community. Where does REST come from? It comes from the community. Where does JSON come from? It comes from the community. Where does, where do a lot of these ideas are open standards, open thoughts, and we participate in those. So I can't really draw that line. I mean, I think we're so embedded in the open source ecosystem and open standards ecosystem that I don't think you can say, you know, this is all our idea or this isn't. You know, I think it's a co-evolution. You know, there's this weird thing, you know, which came first, the flower or the bee? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, the flower's no point without a bee. The bee can't live without the flower. So it's somehow they both emerge together and you can't split them out. So I'm afraid how I feel about community ideas.
Okay, so the shrimp is getting bigger and the whales are circling. So, I mean, you mentioned MuleSoft earlier today, and you look like someone that looks forward. Do you have a strategy in place when the whales start coming for you?
So we've had a few whales come and try and bite us. And so far we've swum past them. And I can't really talk about those scenarios, but I think firstly, I think we'd rather do an IPO than get bought. That's a clear vision that an IPO would give us the ability to chart our own course. So that's very definitely our vision is to continue charting our own course, continue creating a company and developing that company. We've never had the aim of being bought. We never sort of set up a startup, so we're just going to run for 3 or 4 years and target IBM to buy us or someone else to buy us. And then, of course, the open source model, where everything is really truly open source, does give you a lot of freedom. So this is where ForgeRock came from. ForgeRock came from Sun getting bought by Oracle. Nobody, Oracle were going to ditch the product and kill it, and so the committers left, forked the product, and created ForgeRock. And it's doing much better than Oracle's identity. So, so I think that's the other protection, is that if a whale does buy us, and, I think IBM looks like they're doing a pretty good job with Red Hat so far. They better, because it was a kind of expensive purchase, $34 billion. But, I think some acquisitions work out well and some don't. And if the acquisition doesn't work out well, then there's a sort of opportunities for our partners, for our committers, for anyone to say, well, that code is in the open, we can take it and deal with it and take it forward. So that's our kind of parachute.
It's a good answer, thank you.
You're welcome.
So this was also the opportunity to reflect on the day. So it is still formally an agenda slot. So just rack your brains. Any other questions?
So this, I guess, is just probably more related to all the identity stuff we've been talking about. So I mean, is the positioning of the WSO2 identity manager there more on the customer-facing side of things versus, say, perhaps your traditional identity management that perhaps Microsoft AD would be providing as part of Azure, et cetera, et cetera?
So that's a good question. We have two quite distinct communities of users. We have people who use it for employees and internal use cases and APIs. So that's typically used much more as part of the integration space. And then we have a separate set of customers who use it as customer identity access management. And then we have some that use it for both. So I would say it's about 40% pure CIAM. So we have, there's a 3D design tool called SketchUp. Does anyone use SketchUp? You basically draw stuff online and you can output it to your 3D printer and it'll print it. That was owned by Google for a while. They sold it to a company called Trimble. Trimble uses our identity access. They're a long-time customer of ours. They also use ISB for some stuff. They use IAM to do 20 million SketchUp users. So that's pure customer identity access management. Seagate, every Saudi citizen has a government log-on. So we have around, 70 million, 80 million users in that CIAM space managed through our IAM. But then there's also StubHub and Fidelity and all sorts of people who are using it for more internal use cases and integration. So it's a very versatile product, and really we kind of invest pretty evenly between those two use cases.
What's your overall strategy regarding enabling DevOps for your users?
So that's a really good question. We have been building a whole, so a lot of our customers already have a DevOps flow, a CI/CD flow that they use, and obviously we want to fit into that. But we realized that some of our customers didn't, so we've built a kind of predefined CI/CD flow for DevOps for our, it's not really a product, it's just a set of resources in GitHub, and it's a Helm chart actually for Kubernetes. So you can basically go to Kubernetes and say, I want a CI/CD pipeline that installs Jenkins as the main driver, but JUnit, various unit tests, some deployment tools, and that sets up a predefined CI/CD flow for you for all our products. So our strategy is, if you don't have one, we have one out of the box. Our aim is that every new customer, we will either provide them with a CI/CD flow or fit into theirs as part of the, as the initiation of the project. So, and we also, I don't know if anyone mentioned our managed cloud. We also have a managed cloud offering. So of course we have a CI/CD flow for that as well. So if you use us to manage your cloud, then you do a GitHub check-in of the latest artifacts, and we have a flow to deploy them into the production system and test them. You're about to run out of your quota here.
Bit more technical question. So, do you have any plans to make the API gateway and the integration platform a managed service available on Amazon or Azure in the near future? Because the competitors are doing that, so I'm just asking.
So, both of those are a managed service running on our cloud as a pure SaaS offering. You can deploy APIs and integration flows in our WSO2 cloud on a monthly pay model. We have a hybrid model, which is more interesting, which is where the management layer lives in our cloud, but you deploy the gateway into your cloud or into your on-premise. And that's more where we're going, is basically to say we can help manage that deployment into AWS and Azure for you in a hybrid model. So we have quite a lot today. We also have this managed service where some customers just say, look, I want you to run it for me in AWS or Azure, but I want to design what it looks like. So that's a sort of slightly more kind of custom thing, but we run it for you, and we do that a lot for about 20% of our customers.
Okay, so it's more on demand. So, because what we're seeing is the other big guys putting full managed service available, mainly due to the data and regulatory constraints. So you would be able to consume your platforms as a service then within, let's say Europe as an example.
Yes, absolutely.
But what you're saying is not as a de facto standard. You've got a control plane that, as it says, with deployment elsewhere. And on a demand basis, you can actually make it available, for example, in Amazon or Azure as a managed service.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Great question, by the way. Thank you.
API lifecycle management. So, for example, if you have a dev environment, a QA, and a production, is there an automated way of moving an asset on the API manager? across the different environments automatically.
So basically, we have a command line tool that can say, I want to export this config and import it. So we build that as part of that CI/CD pipeline and flow. Basically say, I'm going to deploy a staging environment, and then I'm going to just take that, whatever's in the staging environment, and import it into the production environment.
And then the endpoints get changed automatically across the environment.
Fedora, do you want to add anything to that? No, he says I've got it right, so. I don't know why I'm the only one standing up here. I guess that's the problem of being the founder. But I thought this Q&A was meant to be for all the speakers, but I seem to be the mug here.
The opportunity to ask further questions and to engage is not fully lost, because now is the time for those that have stuck it out for the day. Round number 4 is over. Well done. The cocktails are served downstairs outside the reception, but before I get to that, thank you, Paul, so much for your contribution today, and to the WSO2 team for traveling out. I think we've done you proud in South Africa. Devika mentioned earlier that this has been the best turnout of their summits so far. So to you guys, thank you very much, and well done. Devika did whisper in my ear a moment ago that 54 different companies were represented today. And that, I think, is testament to the traction that WSO2 has achieved in the market already, and clearly the interest in the product moving forward. Today wasn't just about WSO2. I think we got a bit broader than that, but certainly exciting. And I know that I was reflecting, Stephen Covey said that the purpose of our lives should be to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy. Fortunately, that wasn't our goal for today, and that would have been a bit of a stretch. But you will recall, but we did set a goal of to learn and to network and then to enjoy ourselves. So I hope that that goal has been achieved. If so, then my work here today is done. Please join us, and when you do leave this evening, travel home safely wherever that might be. Thank you.